I was out for a run when Dad messaged. We sold your bed, desk, and everything in your room for $750. Your brother Elijah needs it for his baby. Want to come home for Christmas? Buy us a new living room set, $3,200 cash. Otherwise stay away. We already changed the locks and gave your key to him. Mom added, by the way, we told everyone you abandoned us for your rich girlfriend. The whole church thinks you're ungrateful trash. Pay up or we'll tell them you hit me last Christmas. Dad, remember when you begged us not to sell Grandpa's watch he left you? We sold that too. $350. My brother laughed. The neighbors already think you're on drugs. Want us to confirm it. I drove straight to Grandpa's house. Showed him everything. By evening Dad was screaming, what did you tell him? He's giving us 30 days to get out. We're joking. Please let us explain. Before I tell you about the dramatic outcome of the story and how I finally turned the tables on them, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Take a seat, grab a warm drink, and listen closely, because what I am about to tell you will change the way you look at family loyalty forever. I am 29 years old, and I work as an MRI technologist in a busy city hospital. My days are long, often bleeding into 12-hour night shifts where I am surrounded by the steady hum of medical machinery and the quiet panic of people facing the worst days of their lives. You learn to stay calm in that environment. You learn to compartmentalize chaos. But absolutely nothing in my professional training could have prepared me for the text messages that destroyed my family on a freezing Tuesday afternoon in December. I was 3 miles into my afternoon run. The wind was biting, slicing through my jacket and freezing the sweat at the back of my neck. My lungs burned with every breath. I needed this run to clear my head after a grueling shift. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't just one vibration. It was a rapid, aggressive succession of alerts that made my heart skip a beat. Usually, when your phone goes off like that, it means an emergency. Someone is in the hospital. Someone is hurt. I slowed to a jog, pulling the phone out with numb fingers. The screen lit up with a message from my father, Robert. I squinted against the glare of the winter sun and read the words. My blood ran cold. We sold your bed, desk, and everything in your room for $750. Your brother Elijah needs it for his baby. Want to come home for Christmas? Buy us a new living room set. $3,200 cash. Otherwise, stay away. We already changed the locks and gave your key to him. I stopped dead in my tracks. The wind kept howling, but all I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. I reread the text 3 times, trying to make the words form a joke. It had to be a joke. But my father never joked about money, and he certainly never joked about power. Before my brain could even begin to process the sheer audacity of what he had written, another text popped up. This one was from my mother, Martha. By the way, we told everyone at church you abandoned us for your rich girlfriend. The whole church thinks you're ungrateful trash. Pay up or we'll tell them you hit me last Christmas. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Extortion. My own mother was blackmailing me with fabricated abuse allegations to fund a living room remodel. Then, my older brother Elijah chimed into the group chat, his arrogance practically dripping from the screen. The neighbors already think you're on drugs. Want us to confirm it. I stood there on the concrete sidewalk, the neighborhood decorations twinkling merrily around me, feeling completely detached from reality. Then the final blow landed. Another text from my father. Remember when you begged us not to sell Grandpa's watch he left you? We sold that too. $350. My breath hitched. The watch. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the cold air. They knew exactly where to slide the knife to inflict the maximum amount of pain. That watch was my most prized possession. The only thing of true value I owned, both sentimentally and historically. They hadn't just stolen my furniture. They had erased my existence from that house and auctioned off my dignity. I didn't reply. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The shock morphed into a deep, icy clarity. I turned around and sprinted back to my car. I didn't drive back to the house that was no longer mine. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and drove straight toward the one man who could end this madness. My grandfather. At that moment, I still didn't know the full extent of their betrayal, but I knew the war had just begun. To understand the sheer cruelty of what my parents did, you have to understand the dynamic I grew up in. In our house, there was Elijah, the golden child, and then there was me, Mason, the understudy. Elijah is 3 years older than me, but he always required 10 times the resources. Growing up, the rules for him were entirely different. If Elijah failed a class, the teachers were out to get him. If I got a B instead of an A, I wasn't applying myself. The disparity became glaringly obvious when we hit high school. When Elijah turned 18, my parents threw a massive party and surprised him with a used, but very decent, car. They drained a significant portion of what was supposed to be our joint college fund to pay for it. I remember standing in the driveway, watching him rev the engine, while my father clapped him on the shoulder, beaming with pride. When I turned 18, there was no party. There was no car. Instead, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and handed me an electric bill. He told me it was time I learned responsibility and started contributing to the household. I didn't argue. I got a job bussing tables after school, working until midnight, then waking up at 5 a.m. to study. I paid for my own community college classes. I paid for my MRI certification program. I bought my own modest, beat-up sedan. Elijah, meanwhile, bounced from one failed venture to another. He quit college after 2 semesters because it was stifling his creativity. He worked odd jobs, always quitting dramatically because his bosses didn't appreciate his genius. Yet, my parents never stopped funding his lifestyle. They called it supporting his journey. I called it enabling. A few years ago, when I finally landed a stable job at the hospital with a good salary, the dynamic shifted in a sick way. Suddenly, my father was very interested in my finances. He would casually ask about my hourly rate, my overtime pay, and when I was up for a promotion. I quickly learned to dodge the questions. Every time I succeeded, my parents viewed it as an opportunity for them, or more accurately, an opportunity to bail Elijah out of his latest mess. Elijah recently got his girlfriend, Chloe, pregnant. He was 32, unemployed, and living in a tiny apartment he could barely afford. My parents were frantic, desperate to provide for their golden boy. I knew they were stressed, but I never imagined they would look at my bedroom, my sanctuary, and see a liquidation asset. I spent years trying to earn their respect through hard work and silence. I kept my head down. I never asked for money. I just wanted them to look at me the way they looked at him. But the truth was, they never saw me as a son. They saw me as a resource to be mined whenever Elijah ran dry. The most ironic part of my father's sudden eviction notice was the fundamental truth he spent the last decade trying to bury. He didn't even own the house. 11 years ago, my father made a terrible business decision. He invested heavily in a shady franchise opportunity without consulting anyone, taking out loans he couldn't repay. The business tanked within 8 months. We were on the verge of bankruptcy, facing foreclosure on our childhood home. The stress was suffocating. That was when my grandfather, Charles, stepped in. Grandpa Charles is my father's dad. He is a stern, pragmatic man who built a successful hardware supply company from the ground up. He doesn't believe in handouts, but he believes in family survival. When the bank took our home, Grandpa Charles allowed us to move into a large, 4-bedroom house he owned across town as an investment property. The agreement was clear. It was a temporary arrangement. My parents were supposed to pay a significantly reduced rent, get their finances in order, and move out within a few years. That was 11 years ago. A few years stretched into a decade of complacency. My father never quite recovered his pride from that business failure, so he compensated by acting like the undisputed king of Grandpa's property. Over time, he stopped talking about the house as a generous loan and started talking about it as his rightful domain. He painted the walls without asking. He tore up the garden to build a patio. He paid the reduced rent sporadically, always offering Grandpa Charles a barrage of excuses about unexpected expenses. My Uncle Thomas, my father's younger brother, was the worst enabler. Thomas was the peacekeeper of the family, which really meant he was the one who demanded everyone else tolerate my father's toxic behavior. "Your dad is under a lot of pressure, Mason," Thomas would tell me over Thanksgiving dinners. "Just let him have this. Don't mention the deed. It hurts his pride." So we all played along with the delusion. We allowed my father to strut around, barking orders, making unilateral decisions about a property where his name wasn't on a single legal document. He thrived on the illusion of control. He loved hosting church group meetings in the living room, acting the part of the successful patriarch. I always hated the charade, but I stayed quiet. I kept my room clean, I paid for my own groceries, and I stayed out of his way. I thought that by making myself small, I could avoid his wrath. But living in a house of cards means that eventually, someone is going to demand a sacrifice to keep the structure standing. And when Elijah needed a nursery, my father didn't hesitate to throw me out of the castle he didn't even own. He forgot the golden rule of borrowed power. It can be revoked by the true king at any moment. Of all the things they took from me, the furniture meant nothing. A bed is just wood and springs. A desk is just a flat surface. I could replace those with 2 weeks of overtime pay. But the watch was different. The watch was a piece of my soul. It was a vintage, silver-cased pocket watch, heavily worn around the edges. It wasn't encrusted with diamonds or made of solid gold, but its value wasn't in the metal. It belonged to my great-grandfather, who passed it down to Grandpa Charles. When I was younger, I used to sit on Grandpa's porch, fascinated by the rhythmic ticking, watching the intricate gears spin through the glass back. Grandpa Charles always said that time is the only currency you can never earn back, so you must measure it carefully. While my parents fawned over Elijah's loud, empty achievements, Grandpa Charles quietly watched me. He noticed when I started working late shifts. He noticed when I bought my own textbooks. He noticed when I skipped family vacations because I couldn't afford to take time off from the diner. The day I received my official certification as an MRI technologist, there was no family celebration. My parents were busy helping Elijah move into his third apartment that year. I went to Grandpa Charles's house alone, holding the paper certificate. He didn't throw a party either. Instead, he walked over to his heavy oak desk, unlocked the top drawer, and pulled out the silver watch. He placed it in my palm. Felt heavy and cold, yet incredibly significant. "You know the value of hard work, Mason," he told me, his voice gravelly and firm. "You don't expect the world to hand you anything. You earn it. This belongs to a man who understands that." It was the single greatest validation I had ever received. It was proof that someone in my family saw me, not as an afterthought, not as an ATM for my brother, but as a man worthy of respect. I kept that watch in a velvet box on my desk. I polished it every Sunday. It was my anchor. My father knew exactly what that watch represented. He knew the bond between me and Grandpa Charles was something he couldn't control or manipulate. Selling it for a miserable $350 wasn't a desperate financial move. It was a targeted assassination of my spirit. He wanted to strip away the one thing that made me feel valued in that family. He wanted to punish me for having an inheritance of respect that he could never steal. When I read that text, I realized they didn't just want me out of the house. They wanted to break me so thoroughly that I would come crawling back, willing to pay their $3,200 ransom just to belong to a family that despised me. Looking back, the warning signs were flashing bright red for weeks. I was just too exhausted from my hospital shifts to see the trap closing around me. It started around Thanksgiving. Elijah brought Chloe to dinner, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Chloe was visibly pregnant, and Elijah was loudly complaining about their cramped one-bedroom apartment. My father sat at the head of the table, his face tight with forced cheerfulness. He kept glancing at me, his eyes calculating. A few days later, the snooping began. I came home early from a morning shift and found my father standing in the middle of my bedroom. He jumped when I opened the door, hastily pretending he was looking for a misplaced hammer. But his eyes were darting around the room, taking inventory, measuring the space. mentally pricing the antique mirror I bought at a flea market. Just checking the window seals, he mumbled, avoiding my gaze before hurrying out. Then came my mother's sudden interest in my schedule. Martha had never cared about my shifts before, but suddenly, she was keeping a detailed calendar. "Mason, honey, are you working the overnight shift on Tuesday?" she asked sweetly over coffee. "And you have back-to-back doubles next weekend, right? Such a hard worker." I thought she was finally taking an interest in my life. In reality, she was mapping out my exact whereabouts to figure out the largest window of time they had to empty my room without getting caught. The final red flag waved just 3 days before the texts. I was pulling into the driveway and saw my cousin Wyatt lurking near the backyard gate. Wyatt is a notoriously lazy guy who bounces between part-time gigs and always seems to be short on cash. When he saw my car, he practically jumped into the bushes. I rolled down the window. "Wyatt, what are you doing back there?" He forced a nervous laugh, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. "Hey, Mason, just Uncle Robert asked me to come look at the gutters. Said he might hire me to clean them out. Making a few bucks for the holidays." There wasn't a ladder in sight, and it had been raining for 2 days. It made no sense. But my pager buzzed with a message from the hospital, and my brain immediately switched back to work mode. I let it go. I ignored the sinking feeling in my gut. I told myself I was being paranoid. Family doesn't plot against family, right? I was so incredibly naive. They were gathering the dark clouds right above my head, orchestrating a storm that was designed to wash me out of their lives, while extracting every last drop of financial value I had left. They thought they had perfectly executed a flawless heist. They thought I would crumble. The drive to Grandpa Charles's house took 20 minutes, but I have no memory of the journey. I operated purely on adrenaline and cold, hard instinct. I slammed the brakes in his driveway, tires skidding slightly on the frost-covered concrete, and practically leaped out of the car. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the front door open, the old hinges groaning in protest. Grandpa Charles was sitting in his leather armchair by the fireplace, reading a hardcover biography. He looked up, his thick white eyebrows knitting together in concern when he saw my face. I must have looked like a madman. Sweat-drenched running clothes, chest heaving, face flushed but eyes completely hollow. "Mason, what's wrong? Is someone hurt?" he asked, setting his book down immediately. I didn't say a word. Couldn't. My throat was locked tight, choked with a toxic mixture of grief and sheer, unadulterated rage. I walked over to him, pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the group chat, and handed it to him. I stood there, shivering in the warm living room, watching his face. Grandpa Charles is a man who plays poker with stone-cold precision. He rarely shows emotion, but as his eyes scanned down the screen, reading the texts from Robert, Martha, and Elijah, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He read the demand for the $3,200 living room set. He read the threat about the church and the fake abuse allegations. He read Elijah's taunt about drugs. And finally, he read the line about the watch. His jaw tightened. A single, prominent vein throbbed at his temple. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were like chips of flint. There was no pity in his gaze, only a terrifying, quiet fury. "They sold the watch," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. The terrifying thing about Grandpa Charles is how incredibly calm he gets when he decides to destroy something. He slowly stood up, placing my phone gently on the side table. He walked over to his heavy wooden filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He unlocked the bottom drawer, pulled out a thick, blue folder, and dropped it onto the coffee table with a resounding thud. "Do you know what this is, Mason?" he asked, his voice deathly quiet. I shook my head. "This is the deed to that house, the property tax receipts, the insurance documents, all in my name." He tapped the blue folder with a heavy, calloused finger. Your father has been playing house for 11 years. He has confused my patience with weakness. He thinks he is the master of a domain he does not own. Grandpa Charles turned to look at me, his posture ramrod straight. The illusion of my father's authority was shattering right in front of my eyes, replaced by the crushing weight of real power. They wanted to play a game of leverage, Grandpa Charles said, his voice laced with venom. They wanted to see who holds the cards. Fine. We will show them. He pointed to the landline phone on the desk. Call Carter. Tell him to get over here right now with his laptop. You are not going to cry, Mason. You are going to fight. I called Carter immediately. Carter has been my best friend since middle school. He works in IT cybersecurity, possesses a mind like a steel trap, and harbors a long-standing, deep-seated disdain for my parents' manipulative behavior. When I told him what happened over the phone, he didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply said, "Give me 10 minutes," and hung up. He arrived with his heavy-duty laptop bag, a tangled mess of chargers, and a large pizza he picked up on the way. He took one look at my face and didn't ask how I was feeling. He marched straight to Grandpa's dining room table, cleared the placemats, and opened his laptop. The war room was officially established. "All right, sit down, both of you," Carter instructed, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. First rule of surviving a narcissistic attack: document everything. Do not delete a single text. Do not block their numbers yet. We need them to keep talking. People like your dad get sloppy when they think they're winning. I handed him my phone. Carter meticulously took screenshots of every single text in that group chat, backed them up to a secure cloud drive, and emailed copies to both himself and Grandpa Charles. He then created a timeline document, forcing me to sit down and recount every suspicious interaction from the past 3 weeks. The snooping, the questions about my schedule, Wyatt in the backyard. As we laid the puzzle pieces out on the table, the picture became sickeningly clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision fueled by Elijah's need for a nursery. This was a calculated, premeditated financial extraction. "Look at the numbers," Carter said, pointing a pen at his screen. $750 for your furniture. $350 for the watch. That's $1,100. But they are demanding $3,200 for a sofa to let you back in? The math doesn't add up for a simple room swap. This is about leverage. They don't actually care about the living room set, Mason. They are testing you. If you pay the $3,200, you establish the precedent that your boundaries can be bought, and they own you forever. Grandpa Charles sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, listening intently. "They are acting like typical extortionists," he rumbled. "Create a crisis, manufacture a threat, and offer a costly solution." I stared at the screen, a wave of nausea washing over me. Carter was right. My father was treating me like a hostage. He had taken my sanctuary and was demanding a ransom for my return, wrapping it all in the toxic guise of family sacrifice. I took a deep breath, the lingering shock finally burning away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't the weak, desperate son begging for scraps of affection anymore. I had the owner of the house and a cybersecurity expert sitting at the table with me. The forces were assembled. While Grandpa Charles was drafting a document on legal pad paper, Carter kept digging. "Your parents are lazy, Mason," Carter said, adjusting his glasses. "They didn't haul a heavy oak desk and a queen mattress out of that house by themselves. They had help, and whoever helped them might be a weak link." I thought back to the timeline. "Wyatt," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Wyatt was lurking in the backyard 3 days ago. He has a beat-up pickup truck, and he will do absolutely anything for quick cash. Carter's eyes lit up. "Bingo! Let's verify." He brought up a browser window. "Do you remember old Mr. Henderson who lives directly across the street from your parents? The guy who installed those military-grade security cameras after his lawnmower got stolen?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, he's incredibly paranoid." "Paranoia is our best friend today," Carter muttered, dialing a number. He put the phone on speaker. Mr. Henderson answered on the third ring. Carter spun a brilliant, fast-paced lie about me missing a package delivery and needing to check the street view to see if a porch pirate grabbed it between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. that afternoon. Mr. Henderson, eager to play neighborhood watch detective, happily agreed to check his footage. 5 minutes later, Carter's email pinged. A video file from Mr. Henderson. We crowded around the laptop screen. The black and white footage was crystal clear. At exactly 1:45 p.m., shortly after I had left for my run, Wyatt's rusted blue Ford Ranger backed into my parents' driveway. The camera caught the whole miserable scene. My father, Robert, and my cousin, Wyatt, were hauling my desk out the front door. My mother, Martha, was holding the door open, casually sipping from a coffee mug. But the detail that broke my heart all over again was seeing Elijah. Elijah wasn't carrying anything heavy. He was carrying the small velvet box that held Grandpa's watch, tossing it up in the air and catching it, laughing at something my father said. I paused the video, my finger hovering over the trackpad. I zoomed in on Wyatt's face. He was grinning. He was hauling away my life, my safe space, and he was smiling about it. I texted Wyatt, Carter said quietly, looking at his phone. I used a fake number, pretended to be someone looking for odd jobs. I asked what the going rate was for hauling furniture. Look at what he replied. Carter turned his phone toward me. The text from Wyatt read, "Depends on the gig, man. I just cleared out a whole bedroom today for my uncle, easy work. Only paid me $50 and a case of beer though." $50. My cousin, someone I had grown up with, someone I had loaned money to when he couldn't make rent, sold out my entire sanctuary for $50 and cheap beer. The betrayal was so pathetic it was almost comical. The last shred of loyalty I had toward my extended family dissolved right then and there. I looked at Grandpa Charles. His face was a mask of cold stone. The knife was fully twisted in my back, but it only made me want to pull it out and use it. The clock on the wall struck 6 p.m. The silence in the dining room was abruptly shattered by the buzzing of my phone on the table. The caller ID flashed brightly. Dad. My stomach plummeted. A reflex of fear, deeply ingrained from childhood, flared up in my chest. I instinctively reached for the phone to decline the call, terrified of his booming voice, terrified of being yelled at. But a heavy, wrinkled hand clamped down over mine. Grandpa Charles looked at me, his eyes fierce. "Do not ignore it. He is calling to establish dominance. He thinks you are panicking alone in your car right now. He wants to hear you cry. Put it on speaker." I swallowed hard, my finger trembling slightly as I hit the green accept button and pressed the speaker icon. "Mason," my father's voice echoed in the room. He didn't sound angry. He sounded smug, oozing with false authority. "Are you ready to be reasonable yet? Your mother is very upset. You've caused quite a scene today, abandoning your family responsibilities. If you apologize now and agree to the living room set, I might let you sleep on the couch tonight." I opened my mouth, but before I could utter a single word, Grandpa Charles leaned over the phone. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a quiet, terrifying resonance that commanded absolute obedience. "Robert." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Total, deafening silence followed. The smugness vanished instantly. "Dad?" my father croaked, his voice suddenly sounding high and thin, like a frightened child. What are you doing with Mason's phone?" "I am looking at a series of text messages, Robert," Grandpa Charles said, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "I am looking at extortion. I am looking at theft. And I am looking at a man who has clearly forgotten whose roof is keeping the snow off his head. Now wait, Dad, let me explain." "Silence," Grandpa commanded. It was a whip crack. The line went dead quiet again. "You do not own that house, Robert. You are a guest who has overstayed his welcome by a decade. You have 30 days to vacate my property. Official eviction papers will be served by my lawyer tomorrow morning. If there is a single scratch on the walls, I will sue you for damages." Panic. Pure, Unadulterated panic erupted from the speaker. "Dad, please. You can't be serious." My father's voice was frantic, tumbling over itself. "It was just a misunderstanding. We were just trying to motivate him. We were joking, Dad. It's a family joke. Mason knows how we are. Please let us explain. Elijah needs space for the baby. We were just—" "You sold my watch," Grandpa Charles interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, radiating cold menace. "You sold the watch I gave my grandson. You have exactly 48 hours to recover it and place it in my hands, or I will file a police report for stolen property, and I will ensure they know exactly who took it." "Dad, wait!" Grandpa Charles reached down and tapped the red button. The call ended. He looked at me, his expression unchanged. The tyrant who had terrorized my childhood had just been reduced to a begging, stammering mess in less than 2 minutes. The balance of power had violently, permanently shifted. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the spare bedroom at Grandpa's house, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through 100 different scenarios. The next morning, I woke up with a singular mission burning in my chest. I was getting that watch back. I didn't care about the bed or the desk, but I refused to let my father pawn my dignity. Carter arrived early, fueled by energy drinks and a relentless drive. We knew my father was desperate and lazy, which meant he wouldn't have driven far to sell the items. Carter pulled up a map of every pawn shop and second-hand dealer within a 10-mile radius of my parents' house. We started calling. I described the vintage silver casing, the specific Roman numerals, and the small engraving on the back. C.B. Charles Brooks. On the 4th call, we hit the jackpot. A pawn shop called David's Gold and Goods, located just 3 miles from my old neighborhood. The owner, David, a gruff-sounding man, confirmed he had purchased a watch matching that exact description the previous afternoon. A guy brought it in, nervous-looking, sweaty. "Sold it to me for a quick $350. David rasped over the phone. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "That watch was stolen from me. It's a family heirloom. I'm coming down right now to get it." David let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Hold your horses, kid. I run a business here. I paid good money for this piece. If it's stolen, that's between you and the guy who sold it. You want it back? It's on the floor for sale. Price is $1,000. $1,000. I shouted, my temper flaring. "He sold it to you for $350. It's stolen property." "Prove it," David challenged smoothly. "Unless you got a police report with the serial number, it's my property now. $1,000 cash and it's yours. Otherwise, a collector is coming by tomorrow who loves vintage pieces. Might just melt it down for the silver if he doesn't like the mechanics." My stomach churned violently. He was holding my grandfather's legacy hostage, just like my father had held my room hostage. I wanted to scream, to drive down there and smash his display cases. But Carter grabbed my arm, shaking his head frantically. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate down. Screaming wouldn't get the watch back. "Listen to me, David," I said, channeling my grandfather's cold, deadpan tone. "I don't have $1,000 in cash right now, but I am getting a police report, and I will be back. If you sell that watch or melt it down, I guarantee you the legal headache will cost you more than $1,000. Give me 48 hours. There was a long pause on the other end. David sighed, clearly annoyed. 48 hours. Not a minute longer. Then it's gone. He hung up. As if the ransom on the watch wasn't enough, the psychological warfare began right on schedule. My father, having failed to intimidate Grandpa Charles, deployed his most vicious weapon. My mother. Around noon, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Sarah, Uncle Thomas's wife. She sounded breathless and panicked. "Mason, honey, what is happening?" she whispered, clearly hiding in a bathroom somewhere. "Your mother is losing her mind. She's been on the phone all morning calling every prominent member of the church congregation. She's telling everyone that you completely lost it, that you got involved with some rich, drug-addicted girlfriend, and you abandoned the family. Mason, she told Pastor John that you pushed her down the stairs when she tried to intervene." My blood boiled. I squeezed my eyes shut, a wave of intense disgust washing over me. They were doubling down. Instead of apologizing for the extortion, they were actively trying to destroy my reputation in the community so that no one would believe my side of the story. "It's a lie, Aunt Sarah," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady. "All of it. They sold my belongings and locked me out." "I know it's a lie, Mason," she cried softly. "But Thomas is furious with you. He says you disrespecting your father like this is tearing the family apart. He's demanding you come over and apologize to Robert right now. He says if you just give them the money for the living room, this will all blow over." The sheer toxicity of it all was suffocating. Uncle Thomas, the ultimate enabler, wanted me to pay my abusers to restore the fake peace. I felt a surge of pity for Aunt Sarah, trapped in a marriage with a man who demanded submission to a tyrant. "I'm not apologizing, Sarah," I said firmly. "I'm not paying them a dime. And I'm not hiding anymore. Mason, they are going to ruin you. You know how this town is. The rumors are already spreading like wildfire. They are going to make you look like a monster." "Let them talk," I replied, a strange, dark calm settling over me. The fear of their judgment, the fear of being the bad son that had controlled me my whole life, suddenly evaporated. Let them dig their own graves. "Just wait until tomorrow, Aunt Sarah," I told her before hanging up. "Wait until the dust settles." My phone immediately pinged with a text from Uncle Thomas. "You are breaking your mother's heart. Come home and fix this right now before you do damage you can't undo." I didn't reply. I blocked his number. I looked at Carter, who was tracking my mother's social media activity. She had just posted a vague, tearful status about the heartbreak of a prodigal son. They thought they controlled the narrative. They thought they could shame me into submission by weaponizing the community against me. But they didn't realize that a smear campaign only works when the victim stays in the dark. I wasn't hiding in the dark anymore. I was standing in the light, holding the receipts, and I was about to bring the whole house of cards crashing down on their heads. The next morning, the winter air was so crisp it hurt to breathe. But for the first time in my life, I did not feel cold. I felt a burning, undeniable sense of purpose. Grandpa Charles, Carter, and I pulled into my parents' driveway at exactly 9 o'clock. My parents were expecting me. They just were not expecting the company I brought. I walked up the concrete path to the front porch. This was the same path I had walked thousands of times, usually with my head down, exhausted from a long shift at the hospital, hoping to slip into my room unnoticed. Not today. Today I walked up those steps with my shoulders back. Carter flanked me on the left, holding his heavy laptop bag. Grandpa Charles walked on my right. He wore his thick wool overcoat and carried a sleek, red leather folder under his arm. I did not bother using my key. They had already proudly announced they changed the locks anyway. I knocked hard on the front door. 3 heavy, solid thuds. My mother, Martha, opened the door. She had a perfectly crafted, sorrowful smile plastered across her face, ready to play the role of the forgiving mother welcoming her wayward son back into the fold. That smile vanished the second she saw Grandpa Charles standing there, towering over her with eyes like chips of ice. "Charles," she stammered, taking a quick step backward. We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," Grandpa Charles said. His voice was entirely devoid of warmth. He did not wait for an invitation. He stepped past her into the foyer, forcing her to retreat into the living room. Carter and I followed right behind him. My father, Robert, was sitting in his favorite recliner. Elijah was sprawled on the old sofa, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression. When Robert saw his father walk in, he jumped up so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee mug. He quickly tried to puff out his chest, attempting to project the fake authority he had relied on for 11 years. "Dad," Robert said, forcing a nervous chuckle. "What a surprise. Mason actually dragged you into our little family disagreement? I told him yesterday. This is just a misunderstanding about his old bedroom." "Sit down, Robert," Grandpa Charles ordered. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He delivered the command with the absolute certainty of a man who knows he is obeyed. Robert's mouth clamped shut. He slowly sank back into the recliner. Elijah finally looked up from his phone, sensing the sudden, crushing shift in the room's atmosphere. Even my mother stayed completely silent, hovering nervously near the hallway. The smugness they had displayed in their text messages less than 24 hours ago was evaporating rapidly. They were suddenly trapped in a room with the one man they could not manipulate, intimidate, or extort. Grandpa Charles stood in the center of the living room. He did not take off his coat. He looked around the room, taking in the faded wallpaper, the scuffed floorboards, and finally, settling his gaze on my father. "There is no misunderstanding here, Robert," Grandpa Charles said flatly. "But since you insist on calling it that, let us clear up the facts. Mason, read them." I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were completely steady. I opened the folder where Carter had backed up the screenshots. I looked directly at my brother Elijah, then at my mother, and finally at my father. I did not soften my voice. I read the texts exactly as they were written. "We sold your bed, desk, and everything in your room for $750. Your brother Elijah needs it for his baby." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Want to come home for Christmas? Buy us a new living room set. $3,200 cash. Otherwise, stay away. We already changed the locks and gave your key to him." I saw Chloe, Elijah's pregnant girlfriend, standing in the doorway to the kitchen. Her eyes went wide. She looked at Elijah, horrified. "Elijah, you told me Mason moved out months ago and didn't want his stuff," she whispered. Elijah looked away, his face turning a dark shade of red. I kept reading. I read my mother's threat about telling the church I abandoned them for a rich girlfriend. I read her vile threat to fabricate abuse allegations. Martha immediately started waving her hands frantically. "Mason, honey, that was just anger talking. You know how stressed I get. I never actually called anyone at the church." Carter did not miss a beat. He unzipped his bag, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen. The voice of Aunt Sarah filled the living room, frantic and clear from the voicemail she had left me. "Your mother is losing her mind. She's been on the phone all morning calling every prominent member of the church congregation. She's telling everyone that you completely lost it." Carter stopped the recording. Martha turned pale white. She collapsed onto a dining chair, burying her face in her hands. "And finally," I said, turning my gaze back to my father, "the watch. You sold Grandpa's watch for $350. Robert swallowed hard. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the drafty room. "Dad, listen," he pleaded, looking at Grandpa Charles. "Things have been tight. Mason makes a great salary at the hospital now. He is up for a promotion soon. We just thought he should contribute more to the family fund. It was a harsh lesson, I admit, but we are a family." "You are a parasite," Grandpa Charles said. The word hit the room like a physical blow. Grandpa Charles stepped forward and dropped the blue folder onto the coffee table right in front of my father. "Those are your eviction papers," Grandpa Charles stated. "You have 30 days to remove yourselves and your belongings from my property. You will not take a single fixture, a single appliance, or a single light bulb that you did not purchase. If the drywall is damaged, my lawyer will see you in court." Robert stared at the blue folder as if it were a venomous snake. His entire manufactured kingdom was collapsing. The house he had pretended to own, the authority he had wielded like a weapon, it was all gone in an instant. "Dad, you can't do this," Robert begged, his voice cracking. "Where will we go? We don't have savings. We poured everything we had into Elijah's college fund years ago." "That sounds like a personal failure, Robert, not my problem," Grandpa Charles replied coldly. "You chose to steal from a hard-working son to fund a lazy one. You chose to use my house as a bargaining chip for your extortion. Your time is up." Then, Grandpa Charles did something that completely shifted the axis of my world. He opened the sleek, red leather folder he had been holding under his arm. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents with heavy black seals. He placed them on the table next to the eviction notice. He took a silver pen from his breast pocket, flipped to the last page, and signed his name with a bold, aggressive stroke. He handed the pen to me. "Sign on the dotted line, Mason," he instructed. I looked down at the document. The bold letters at the top read, "Transfer of deed and ownership." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Grandpa, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This is your inheritance," he said, looking me dead in the eye. "I am not leaving this house to a man who sells his own son's bed. I am giving it to the grandson who understands the value of $1 and the meaning of hard work. Sign it." I took the pen. My hand was shaking now, not from fear, but from the overwhelming tidal wave of vindication. I signed my name next to his. Grandpa Charles picked up the document, blew on the ink to dry it, and looked down at my father. "Robert," Grandpa Charles said, his voice ringing with absolute finality, "meet your new landlord. You have 30 days to get out of Mason's house." This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The silence that followed Grandpa Charles's declaration was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. I looked down at the signed deed in my hand. It felt heavier than gold. Robert stared at me. The arrogant, dominating father who had terrified me for 29 years was gone. In his place sat a broken, pathetic man who suddenly realized he held absolutely zero cards. He slid off the recliner and literally dropped to his knees on the faded carpet. "Mason," he choked out. Tears were streaming down his face. Real tears born from pure terror. "Mason, please. Son, please. You can't do this. We're your parents. We raised you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about the room. I'm sorry about the texts. Just tell your grandpa you forgive us. Please, just let us stay." Martha rushed over, grabbing my arm, her manicured nails digging into my jacket. "We'll get your furniture back today. We'll buy you new furniture. Please, Mason. You know your father has a bad heart. The stress of a move will kill him." Even Elijah, the golden child, was standing now, looking frantically between me and our parents. For the first time in his life, nobody was rushing to protect him. I looked down at my father groveling on the floor. A few days ago, this sight would have broken me. I would have rushed to comfort him, internalized the guilt, and begged him to stand up. I would have paid the $3,000 just to stop the crying. But looking at them now, I felt absolutely nothing. The well of empathy I had reserved for my family was completely bone dry. They had drained it themselves. I gently but firmly peeled my mother's hands off my arm. I stepped back, creating a clear physical boundary between us. "You didn't sell my room because you were stressed," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You sold it because you thought I was weak. You thought my need for your approval was stronger than my self-respect. You were wrong." I pointed toward the front door. "You have 30 days to pack your things. Do not contact me. Do not text me. You will deal exclusively with Grandpa's lawyer regarding the move-out inspection. If you try to vandalize this house, I will press charges." I turned my back on them. I walked out the front door with Carter and Grandpa Charles, leaving the sounds of my mother's hysterical sobbing echoing in the foyer. The storm inside that house was raging, but as I stepped off the porch and breathed in the freezing winter air, I felt completely, utterly peaceful. I had the house, but the victory was not complete. I still needed Grandpa's watch. Later that afternoon, I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot. I had to call out of my scheduled shift. My hands were still shaking from the morning's adrenaline, and I knew I could not safely operate an MRI machine. My phone rang. It was Dr. Harrison, the hospital director. He was a no-nonsense man who usually only called technicians directly if there was a massive crisis. "Mason," Dr. Harrison said brusquely, "your supervisor tells me you called out. This is highly unusual for you. You have a spotless attendance record. Is everything all right?" I hesitated. I hated bringing personal drama into my professional life. But I was desperate. "Dr. Harrison, I'm dealing with a family emergency. A severe one. My parents stole a valuable family heirloom from my room and sold it to a local pawn shop. The broker is demanding $1,000 to give it back, or he's melting it down tomorrow." There was a pause on the line. "Which pawn shop?" Dr. Harrison asked. "David's Gold and Goods on 5th Street. Dr. Harrison let out a sharp scoff. "David. I know that sleazeball. He tried to fence stolen surgical equipment a few years back. Give me 20 minutes, Mason. Do not pay him a dime." 30 minutes later, I pulled up to the pawn shop. A marked police cruiser was idling out front. Dr. Harrison was standing on the sidewalk talking to a police captain. It turned out Dr. Harrison and the precinct captain played golf together every Sunday. I walked into the shop behind the captain. David was standing behind the counter, looking incredibly pale and sweating profusely. He was holding the velvet box containing Grandpa's watch. The captain leaned on the glass counter. "So, David," the captain said casually, "my friend Dr. Harrison here tells me you've come into possession of a stolen vintage pocket watch. Engraved initials CB. You know the laws about receiving stolen property without running proper checks, right? Could mean a suspension of your license." David practically shoved the velvet box across the counter toward me. "It was a mistake. The guy who sold it said it was his. I didn't know. Just take it. Take it and go. I believe the man who sold it to you received $350, I said, pulling cash from my wallet. I counted out the exact amount and placed it on the glass. "I am buying my property back for exactly what you paid for it, not $1,000. Consider this a generous resolution." David snatched the cash without making eye contact. I picked up the velvet box. I opened it. The silver casing gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the pawn shop. The gears were still ticking perfectly. I closed my hand around it, feeling the solid weight of it. My grandfather's legacy was safe. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics and legal paperwork. Grandpa Charles's lawyer served the official eviction notice. My parents tried calling a few times, leaving desperate, weeping voicemails, but I kept them blocked. I was done negotiating with terrorists. 2 weeks into their 30-day notice, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Chloe, Elijah's girlfriend. She sounded exhausted. "Mason," she said quietly, "I moved out today. I left Elijah. I'm moving back in with my parents in Ohio." "I'm sorry to hear that, Chloe," I said, though honestly. I thought it was the smartest decision she had ever made. "I need to tell you something," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't leave without telling you the truth about why they sold your room. It wasn't about the baby. Elijah didn't even want that furniture." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your dad owed Elijah money, Mason," Chloe revealed. "A lot of it. Back in August, your dad convinced Elijah to take $20,000 out of his savings. Money my parents gave us for the baby, and invest it in some obscure cryptocurrency your dad read about online. Your dad promised it would triple in a month." I closed my eyes, rubbing my temples. It was so incredibly predictable. Robert, still chasing the phantom success that ruined him 11 years ago, dragging his favorite son down with him. "The crypto tanked," Chloe said, crying softly now. "It went to zero. Elijah was furious. He threatened to tell the whole family what your dad did. So your dad panicked. He promised Elijah he would make it right. He told Elijah he was kicking you out, giving Elijah the entire house eventually, and selling your stuff to give Elijah some quick cash to keep him quiet. The subtwist hit me like a freight train. The entire narrative of family sacrifice, the guilt trips, the demands for a new living room set. It was all a massive, elaborate smokescreen. Robert wasn't asserting dominance as a patriarch. He was desperately trying to cover up his own catastrophic financial failure by throwing me under the bus to pay off his debt to the golden child. My room wasn't a nursery. It was a settlement payment. "Thank you for telling me, Chloe," I said gently. "Good luck in Ohio." I hung up the phone. Any lingering, microscopic shred of guilt I had about evicting them vanished into thin air. They didn't just betray me. They used me as a human shield for their own pathetic incompetence. Martha, realizing that tears and apologies were not going to get her house back, reverted to her true nature. Pure, unadulterated malice. If she was going down, she wanted to drag me down with her. A week before their move-out date, I was called into the HR office at the hospital. Dr. Harrison was sitting there alongside the HR director. "Take a seat, Mason," Dr. Harrison said. He didn't look angry, just deeply tired. "We received a rather disturbing phone call this morning. A woman claiming to be your mother called the main hospital switchboard. She demanded to speak to the administration." My stomach tightened. I knew exactly what she had done. "She claimed that you have a severe addiction to stolen hospital sedatives," the HR director said, reading from a notepad. "She claimed you are unstable, violent, and a danger to patients." I let out a long, slow breath. "It's retaliation," I explained quickly. "I recently took legal possession of the house they are living in, and I evicted them. She threatened to make these accusations in a text message weeks ago." I pulled out my phone, ready to show them the screenshot Carter had saved. Dr. Harrison held up his hand. "You don't need to show me that, Mason. I know your work ethic. I know your character. And I know the kind of people who try to fence stolen watches at David's Gold and Goods." Dr. Harrison leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. When the switchboard operator realized the nature of the call, they routed it directly to my office. I took the call personally. A small, grim smile played on the corners of Dr. Harrison's mouth. "I informed your mother that recording false accusations against a licensed medical professional to their employer is a textbook definition of defamation per se. I told her that our hospital's legal department is extremely aggressive in protecting our staff from malicious harassment. I promised her that if she ever called this facility again, or spread these lies to any other medical board, we would bury her in civil lawsuits so deep she would never see daylight." I stared at him, absolutely stunned. "She hung up very quickly after that," Dr. Harrison added casually. "She and your father are also permanently banned from entering this facility for any non-life-threatening medical care. We protect our own here, Mason. Go back to work." My mother had tried to drop a bomb on my career, and it had blown up directly in her face, severing one of the only good medical lifelines they had in the city. Her toxicity had finally met an immovable object. The final nail in their social coffin came 2 days before they had to vacate the property. I was at the house, doing a preliminary walkthrough with Grandpa Charles's lawyer to ensure they weren't destroying the drywall. The house was full of cardboard boxes. Robert and Martha were silently packing in the kitchen, refusing to look at me. The arrogant swagger was entirely gone, replaced by a sullen, bitter defeat. The doorbell rang. I answered it. Pastor John stood on the porch. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, holding his Bible tightly against his chest. "Mason," Pastor John said, his voice grave. "May I come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. He walked into the living room, completely ignoring Robert and Martha in the kitchen. He looked at me, his expression full of regret. "Mason, I owe you a profound apology," Pastor John began. His voice carried, making sure my parents could hear every word. "When your mother called me weeks ago, she told me a terrible story. She said you had abandoned your family, that you were struggling with substances, and that you had become violent. I am deeply ashamed to admit that I believed her without speaking to you first." I nodded slowly, letting him speak. "The truth always finds the light, Mason," Pastor John continued. "A few days ago, I had a meeting with the precinct captain regarding our youth outreach program. He casually mentioned the incident at the pawn shop. He told me about the stolen watch. He told me about the eviction. I heard a dish shatter in the kitchen. Martha had dropped a plate. I realize now that your parents have been lying to the congregation for years, Pastor John said, his voice firming up with righteous disappointment. They used the church as a shield for their pride. I have spoken with the church elders. Your parents have been asked to step down from all their committee positions. We cannot have leadership built on a foundation of deceit and extortion against their own child. Pastor John placed a hand on my shoulder. You are a good man, Mason. You handled a terrible betrayal with grace and the law on your side. Our doors are always open to you. He turned and walked out. He didn't even say goodbye to my parents. The social isolation was complete. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Sarah stopped calling. The neighbors stopped waving. Robert and Martha had tried to burn my reputation to the ground, but the wind shifted, and the fire consumed them instead. They packed the last of their boxes in complete, suffocating silence. 1 year later, the snow was falling gently outside the large bay window of my living room. I stood by the fireplace, adjusting a red ornament on the branches of a massive, 9-foot Christmas tree. The house smelled like pine needles and roasting turkey. It was my house now, legally, emotionally, and physically. I had spent the last 12 months tearing down the dark wallpaper my mother loved, repainting the walls in bright, warm colors, and filling the space with furniture I bought myself. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere that used to choke this place was completely gone. Grandpa Charles was sitting in his usual leather armchair by the fire, sipping a glass of bourbon and reading his book. Carter was sprawled on the new sofa, aggressively typing on his laptop, trying to beat a deadline before dinner. My phone buzzed on the mantelpiece. I picked it up. A text from an unknown number. Hey Mason, it's Elijah. Look, things are really bad right now. Mom and Dad are fighting constantly in this awful apartment. I'm broke. I know we had our differences, but it's Christmas. Can you spare a few $100 for your big brother? We're family. I stared at the screen for a moment. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel guilt. I just felt a profound sense of distance, like I was reading a message from a stranger in another country. I tapped the screen, blocked the number, and set the phone face down. Everything all right, Mason? Grandpa Charles asked, not looking up from his book. Everything is perfect, Grandpa. I smiled, walking over to hand him a refill. I learned a very hard lesson that year. Family is not defined by blood. Blood just means you share genetics. Family is defined by respect, by safety, and by who stands next to you when the storm hits. My parents taught me that sometimes the most toxic people in your life come disguised as your protectors. They taught me that endurance is not a virtue when you are enduring abuse. I walked away from the people who demanded my humiliation as rent, and I walked into a life of peace. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a heavy one, but it is a truth I needed to share. I hope this resonated with you in some way. I hope that if you are sitting in the dark right now, wondering if you are crazy, wondering if you are the bad guy for wanting basic respect, this story gives you the clarity you need. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to save your own sanity? Let me know your experiences in the comments. And finally, if you are hearing my voice right now, it means you stayed until the very end. You are part of what I call the 1% Club. Please comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. It is our secret code to recognize the people who have the patience and the empathy to listen to a full story of survival and triumph. It lets me know that you are amazing, and it helps build this community of support. Please hit that like button, and make sure to follow the channel so we can take this journey together in the next video. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you next time.